Hello, listeners. This is your co-host, Arman Priyadarshan, and you're tuning in to the Neural Network. Vasu isn't here today, but we are being joined by Sidharth Subbiah, a guest co-host, and Professor Carolyn Rosé from Carnegie Mellon's University School of Computer Science. Professor Rosé, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. As Armand said, I'm Carolyn Rosé. I have been a professor at CMU since 2003, and I have been working in artificial intelligence since even a decade before that. In fact, I started doing neural net research the same summer that Terminator 2 came out. And my current husband of 32 years and I were doing research for a professor in neuroscience at that time. And we thought we were really cool because we were like the bad guys in Terminator 2. But currently, I do most of my work on the good side of artificial intelligence. I apply my work in the fields of medicine and also education.
Could you tell us about your primary research interests and like a brief overview of some projects?
Sure. I think that my research can be described from lots of different perspectives. Some of my work is core artificial intelligence research, trying to push the boundaries of capabilities on the AI side. But I think what I'm most excited about really is on the application side. So on the education side, for about 20 years now, I've been doing work on conversational approaches to education. So these are enabled through artificial intelligence technologies like conversational agents and text mining and multimodal discussion process monitoring. And all of these allow me to bring together insights from linguistics and psychology with the idea of how machine learning actually works. And in my teaching and in my research, what I'm really interested in when it comes to machine learning is what about the raw signal, which is really very continuous, do you have to actually make discrete and simplified in order for it to become appropriate as a feature or features for machine learned models? And I think that not enough thinking goes into what information needs to be preserved from the signal. So I'm always pushing people to think more deeply about that.
Could Yeah, it's a really interesting way of describing it. Sorry, Sid, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, could you tell us some of the highlights from your research journey that you really think would be exciting for our listeners to hear?
Sure. So the first research study where we demonstrated that conversational agent-based support for learning during computer-supported practice was done actually before I became faculty at CMU. I was working at the Learning Research and Development Center at the University of Pittsburgh, and we were working in the domain of college-level physics. And so what we did was we were working with a tutoring system called Andes that had hints that could be given either on demand or triggered by mistakes that students might make. And they were static pieces of text. And we compared how well would students learn when they had that kind of feedback versus a more conversational form of feedback that I was working on developing at that time. And in that study, which was now more than 2 decades ago, we found that students learned significantly more from the interaction than from the static text. Then we followed that up with a number of studies to try to understand what was it about the experience that was particularly valuable for students. And it turned out that what was really key was students thinking through a line of reasoning. Soon after that, I started to work on conversational agents that would work not just with individual students, but groups of students. And the goal of the agents was to get the students to help each other think through these lines of reasoning. And so over the decades, I have worked on a number of different design principles for how those agents operate as catalysts in groups of human students working together to help each other learn. The first study where we evaluated that took place in 2006. And in that study, we found that students learned as much from a partner student as they did from a conversational agent. But if they had the support of both, then they learned about a quarter of a letter grade more. So just having a partner student or just having the conversational agent, they learned about 1 letter grade more than doing the activity by themselves. But if they had both, then they learned about 1 1/4 letter grades more. And that was just an entry-level study. And so since that time, we've developed numerous design principles for these conversational agents and have run dozens of studies in classrooms at different levels, age groups, topic areas. And most recently, I've been working in collaborative software development, helping students learn more from their work together as they're writing code and exploring principles like in cloud computing to think about scalability issues and efficiency issues. And most recently, we've been exploring how generative AI gives us a little bit more of an edge in terms of developing this agent-based support. And we ran a study where we were using the LLMs to be able to help students see alternative strategies, but including details from their own design, so that they could really see how would my design have looked different if a different strategy had been used underlying the work. And then they can look at the trade-offs in a much more situated way. And we found that for students who were coming into the activity with lower prior knowledge, they were able to use that form of support much more effectively than a generic form of showing them an alternative strategy. And so we see that that way of pulling details out of a context and working them into a narrative that generative AI is actually good at is a good tool for learning. And in general, I would say I'm not a bandwagon person. I don't believe that, LLMs are going to totally change education. I don't see that happening. But I think if we can get people who know what experiences students need to have in order to learn well, we can take the capabilities that we're able to use better now with the recent advances and develop those more powerful solutions. But it really takes some concerted effort to really find those opportunities. And my prediction is lots of companies are starting now and people are really excited about generative AI. But I think that what will happen is discouragement will set in. People will realize that it's not so easy to have a significant positive effect on learning, but some things will stick, and we will see ways in which it will be used for good going forward.
Those are a lot of interesting points you bring up. So first of all, like you mentioned, learning through like conversation and through dialogue, at least for me, is like been like significantly better than just I guess just getting like, for example, like with our school system, we use Canvas, which you might be familiar with. Like for like math homework and stuff, like if we use like WebWorks, for example, they kind of like if we get an answer wrong, instead of giving us like an explanation, it kind of just like says that our answer is wrong and then just gives us a small hint. And especially when I was doing like an online class, like something like that would be like far less beneficial than having like either like a language model or like some sort of conversational agent just like walk me through the problem. And we did talk about this with like Neil Heffernan, which is like who's a guest on our previous podcast.
Worked with Neil. We've known each other for decades.
Have you heard of like assessments? I'm sure you have if you have.
Of course.
Yeah. So that was an interesting point. So also like I was kind of curious why you think that language models aren't going to play as significant of a role in the education system. So I feel like at least like for us, like we have like a class where we have like scientific writing and like we do like a lot of I guess like a lot of paperwork. And for stuff like that, like it's, at least like tools like GPT or like generative AI in general can be like really, really helpful for just doing like small menial tasks. So I guess like I don't know if I significantly like or disagree. I'm just like curious as to why you think like language models won't play as huge of a role.
Well, so one issue is that language models have been around since the 50s, at least. So they're not new, actually. And we have been using language models in artificial intelligence applications for all of that time. And so now we're just exploring bigger ones. And so the kinds of things that you can do with language models now are the same as the kinds of things that we could do with language models a year ago, 5 years ago. It's just that we can do them a little bit better now. So there seems to be this perception that all of a sudden this new technology came down the pike. But that's actually just not true. The reason why it seems that way is because it's just more accessible. It's easier for people to get access to something in that space that they can adapt for an application without having to build it themselves. And it's being publicized more. But actually, let's say 15, 18 years ago, there was kind of a big advance in machine learning for probabilistic graphical models. And at that time, people thought that they were kind of magic, and they were better than an earlier, you could build a language model with a probabilistic graphical model foundation. And actually, there are large language models that are sort of a hybrid between neural net as its basis and probabilistic graphical models in there as well. I think that actually it's a good thing that the field has kind of come together. Those used to be kind of really two sides of the fence, and people who, you know, had bad things to say about each other's work. But so I think great that people do more of an integrated approach now. But even before probabilistic graphical models, there was singular value decomposition, which was a way of building a language model from a big body of text. And at that time, people were making very similar claims about using those models to pass intelligence tests and things, lots of the same kinds of things. And then, you know, actually latent semantic analysis, which underlyingly uses singular value decomposition to build up the model, was used in lots of things. But the truth is that what's most important for having an impact on learning is knowing what experiences students need to have. There are lots of ways of building those experiences. We can use language models or other technologies, and some of those kinds of experiences have already been being fueled by language models, but earlier instances of them. So I think we can do a little bit more, but it's not like there's like a whole set of things that weren't possible at all that all of a sudden are possible. And so because of that, I don't think that things are really going to be that different. I think what makes things different is that they are being applied more broadly because of the press. And so because a lot of excitement was stirred up, more people are paying attention, more people are trying to do stuff, and getting people to try to do creative stuff to have some impact leads to some of those people finding a way to have that impact. And so because of that, I think that there will be things that will come out of all of this hype that are positive, but it won't be because all of a sudden there's this totally new thing. It'll be because of all of the attention that's being given and all the energy that's putting in. An example of a time in history when something very similar happened was when massive open online courses were first big. They were in the media and people were saying the whole face of education is going to change. We are going to close the achievement gap. We're going to provide experiences to everyone, democratize educational experiences, and universities as we know them are going to go away. And none of that happened. Actually, none of that happened. But what did happen was that a lot of people who weren't interested in educational applications became interested. Lots of new companies started up, and there was a lot more focus on doing something in that space, and the energy being devoted to doing something good in the education space, again, creates more opportunity for something good to come out of it. So I do believe that we will see good things coming out of this. I just think it's not so easy to solve the big problems in the world. I would like to quote Bill Gates from a keynote talk that he gave. I'm told that he doesn't any longer believe this, but he did at the time. There was a conference on education for development. It happened when? Probably, again, sometime between 15 and 20 years ago. And he started out his keynote talk by saying that the problems in the world are big and they can't be solved by computers. And I think he was right. If you look at what it is that causes disparities and perpetuates them, it's not primarily technical, and throwing lots of money at it isn't going to make it go away. And there's more that kids need also to really learn what they need to learn and be prepared for a career than just having good instruction. And those problems, they're not so easy to solve. and we're chipping away, and we want to make a difference. But I don't think that this advance in artificial intelligence is really what's going to totally get us over the finish line.
I think the way that you just described that is like the simplest way I ever heard somebody like explain this new emergence. And I think it's also very easy to understand the way that you phrased it. Something that this kind of resonates with me because like school ended for us maybe 2 weeks ago, and we were having this discussion in my computer science class on, oh, how is AI a pro or is it a con, right? And then one of the topics that came was, how is AI going to be implemented into like the school and classroom like setting? And like what took us maybe 4 or 5 days to figure out and kind of come to some kind of conclusion, you just came onto it within, you just explained it in the last like 2 or 3 minutes. So thank you for that. That was very easy to understand. We kind of wanted to switch back a little bit, talking a little bit more about your background. So how would you say, or rather, what motivated you to pursue analyzing and fostering conversation? And I mean like language, HCI, and EdTech.
Yeah, that's a good question. There are lots of answers to that question. I've always been shy, which people sometimes don't believe because I don't come across as seeming shy always. Sometimes I do. But I struggled when I was growing up to be able to put myself out there and be active in interactions conversationally. And I like to tell a story that one time there was a family reunion, and my family went to a park, and I was playing in the sand. I was maybe like 5 years old, and I was so quiet, they forgot about me and left. They did come back. They did come back. But I say, since that time, I have understood the vital importance of conversation. And so I do think that being shy creates like an intentional look at conversation and how it works and what's hard about it and what's interesting about it. And so I have always been interested in that. And I got interested also in foreign languages, again, as a kid. But my dad traveled a lot, and he would bring language books home, and I'd study those, and I wanted to travel the world too. And so those things built up an interest. But from the moment I took my first computer class, though, I was hooked, and I just enjoyed the kind of thinking processes, and I liked writing programs. And I had my first computer was a Commodore 64. I loved that thing. And so I decided I was going to major in computer science. And while I was in undergrad, I asked myself, what do I want to do with this when I'm, going forward? What is my goal? What is my career goal? And there were two professors who I really admired. And one of them was an artificial intelligence researcher, and the other one was an educational technology researcher. So I took classes and did research with both of them. And I actually really enjoyed the artificial intelligence one more, but I felt like there would be more opportunity for positive human impact on the educational technology side. And so that's why that has always been my big focus of application area, but I've continued to develop the AI technology side as a tool.
Yeah, as a bit of like an introvert myself, I can definitely relate to, I guess, like the aspect of like overthinking conversations. Like I know like on like the car rides home, sometimes I'm just like my parents always ask me why I'm so quiet. I'm just like going through the events that happen through the day. I think the way you combine like that aspect of conversation with other interests like computer science is like really, really cool. And also you did like knock out one of my other questions, which was like, what is like an experience that kind of help shape your research interests and motivations? But also we wanted to kind of talk about the education system in general. So like I'm sure like you had like an abundant level of experience given like your level of education, as well as the fact that you are like a teacher and an educator. And also like considering the fact that you work in ed tech, I was kind of curious if like your work has influenced your style of teaching and how you go about like working with students.
Yeah, I think that my research on computer-supported collaborative learning makes me really believe in the resource that students can be for each other. And so I think that because I have seen that over and over in my research, that I tried to get a lot of interaction between students going in my teaching as well. So more and more, I tried to incorporate collaborative learning activities in the classes that I teach. And I very much enjoy looking for the opportunities to do so. If you look over a curriculum, it's not that every activity should be collaborative. That wouldn't be the most efficient way that students should learn. But when you get to the places where there's some complexity, there's some creativity you could bring in, that you could apply things in different ways, there's a multifaceted aspect to what you're learning. Those are places where a valuable discussion can be had, kind of like the discussion you said that you were having in your class, where you guys were working together to reason out, what is this AI thing and how is it going to shape our world? I'm sure that the ideas evolved a lot through the pieces that the different students brought from their own experiences. And I'd love to see those processes happening. I think that you can learn things that way that combine across the experiences of many students that you wouldn't get from just one presentation of those ideas. And again, maybe it's not necessary for every one of the concepts that we need to learn in school to learn it that way. Maybe there isn't always multiple valuable perspectives on every concept or skill that we need to learn. But we can see, almost any class of any complexity has some opportunities where a lot of ideas are coming together, and it's those exciting places where I really like to see that magic happening. And I enjoy getting that going in my classes. And I feel like it really makes people feel connected to the material because they contributed towards it. Part of the learning experience came from them.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I actually like it kind of like ties back to something that our history teacher taught us about like in freshman year, both of us like a couple years back. But what are your thoughts on it's kind of a random thought, but what are your thoughts on Socratic seminar? And I guess just like discussion as well as like questions in the class.
Yeah, I would say that when I first started to build conversational agents for learning, the Socratic style was my inspiration. And so that was what I tried to emulate with the technology that I was building. And in order to be able to do that, I sometimes role played being that Socratic agent with students. And one thing I have noticed is that it really only works if the foundation is there. The students have to have something to build on, because what you're really doing is helping them to start where they are, and you're leading them step by step to construct that line of reasoning. And so I think it takes some sensitivity to detect when it's appropriate and effective to be able to use that kind of strategy. If the foundation doesn't exist, you can keep asking questions and it isn't going to go anywhere, and it won't be a useful way of using that time. So again, some nuance is needed in order to apply it effectively, but I do enjoy and believe in the process of drawing the reasoning out from students with the questioning. One thing that that sort of grew into for me started in a long-term collaboration I had with a research leader named Lauren Resnick. And she came up with a classroom facilitation technique called accountable talk. And basically what that set of strategies is a way of standing outside of that line of reasoning, not asking content questions per se, but supporting a process where students are asking each other questions, they're making conjectures, they're challenging each other. And in that, students are still constructing those lines of reasoning for themselves the way you'd be trying to draw it out with the Socratic style. But that kind of strategy is actually better at drawing it out from a group, because now they're constructing that line of reasoning together. And you're keeping everyone engaged. Instead of talking to one student and maybe everyone else is zoning out, everyone is kind of on call in some way. And so you can keep the whole group involved. And so I've moved into believing that that's a better strategy for supporting a group in a discussion rather than an individual student in a discussion.